Before I get started, I just want to take a moment to acknowledge my patron Chris, who raised his pledge and has become a Thunderwalker. I appreciate you. You make it so much easier to do what I do. Thanks, Chris. The show is here this Friday, or possibly Thursday U.S. Pacific Time. I'm not sure exactly. I am mostly off social media for the next few days because they did the red carpet rollout and I don't want to get any more spoiler clips. You should check out my YouTube channel. The link is in the show notes. I've got some videos about the Wheel of Time on Prime already, but more importantly, I am planning on posting some manner of reactions to the episodes when they drop. I haven't decided whether I'll do a live stream or shorter bits. I'm still very new to this whole thing, so you'll just have to, expect that I'm going to shoot from the hip and just roll with it. I know that Prime does not allow people to record their video, which might not make for very interesting YouTubing, so I'll have to see what I can do over the next day or two. Regardless, you will get some manner of video of me being googly-eyed about the Wheel of Time on Prime, and you'll get real-time thoughts and feelings. And with that, here is your long-awaited next episode about the actual books. The stone won't fall until the podcast of the dragon comes to your device. Hey everybody, my name is Morgan. You might have seen me called the Grey Warder on Twitter and Discord. Welcome to the 29th episode of Podcast of the Dragon. As the shadow rises, so does the dragon, but he trips over his feet along the way. In this episode, I explore the very well-rounded character growth RJ puts our awkward messiah through as he whiles away his hours in the Stone of Tyr, reading, doing crafts, and being made extremely uncomfortable by women. If Rand al'Thor, 19-year-old rookie governor Rand al'Thor as he is at the beginning of The Shadow Rising, ran for the President of the United States, I would totally vote for him. I wouldn't care that he was newly stabilized from a bad manic episode, I wouldn't care that he was honestly unqualified, and I wouldn't care that he was still mentally unstable. He has the fundamental quality that would earn not just my vote, but my loyalty and adoration. Rand cares. He cares, and he tries. He makes a concerted effort to get things right. At the start of The Shadow Rising, he's working to be the best dragon that he can be. People matter to Rand. Fairness matters to Rand. Wealth inequality matters, and so does justice. He detests the general culture of cruelty that rules the day-to-day lives of the people of Tyr, and he has the power to effect real change, which would make him a stellar candidate. Rand's fundamental nature and his desire to do his job right, not just from a sense of following his moral compass, but from an intellectual wish to focus and learn and do it correctly and be a mindful dragon. That's an incredible trait, and it shows a side of Rand that we knew was there. We saw glimmers of it in Book 1 when he and Matt were alone together. The tone of leadership and his general kindness and decency shone through, but here, at the start of Book 4, we get to see the first time that he is actually put in charge of governance, how Rand deals before things get so overwhelming that he just doesn't have time for anything but the bare minimum, and it's really kind of a beautiful thing. I'm going to briefly summarize the time we spend with Rand during the 5-ish days that we're in the stone. Chapter 2 of The Shadow Rising starts out in Perrin's head, and it mentions the 2-week growth of beard. So for 20 days, all of our main characters have been in the Stone of Tyr, and they're basically all trying to find their way. RJ spends 20 chapters almost exclusively in the stone, unfolding events over these few days, and exploring all the various crises that each of our main characters are going through, then giving them conflicts or events that basically force them to choose what they're going to do. Our first scene with Rand is in his chambers, just before he, Mat, and Perrin are struck by the bubble of evil. He's dreaming, wakes to find that Berylane has invited herself in, and during their awkward conversation he's attacked by mirror images of himself. Berylane exits stage left, and Perrin replaces her, providing first aid and sending the maidens for Moiraine to heal Rand. Next day, Egwene and Elaine show up to attempt to teach him how to channel, and also for Egwene to officially break off their engagement, and Elaine to step up and declare her desire to be Rand's make-out partner, and incidentally to become his occasional tutor about matters of statehood. RJ talks about 3 days passing where everybody does their own thing, and on the night of the 3rd day, Lanfear shows up in her Selene costume and reveals herself to Rand, shields him and blocks him from Kalendor, and only releases him when a gray man slips in, at which point Rand learns that the stone has been invaded by Shadowspawn. He rallies the defenders to protect the stone, defeats the Shadowspawn, and caps off the evening with a trip through the Redstone doorway to the lands of the Aelfin. The following day, he gathers the nobles in the heart of the stone, gives his final instructions, which include sending Terran soldiers and High Lords into Rhuidean, and then drives Kalendor into the floor. Then he leaves with the Aiel, Moiraine, Lon, Mat, and Egwene to head for Rhuidean, a journey everyone thinks will take weeks, but only takes the couple of hours needed to travel to the Portal Stone. The Rand at the beginning of The Shadow Rising is a Rand that I really like. He's in this nascent ruler stage. It's a huge jump from where he came from at the beginning of The Dragon Reborn, where he was a leader in the sense that he was the head of the Shinerans, but really he was more like a figurehead, and Moiraine was making most of the significant decisions. That's not happening anymore. Now he is at a place where he can say emphatically, I'm in charge, I'm going to make the decisions, I'll delegate the tasks and tell you what to do, but I'm steering this ship. At the start of the last book, he's technically the leader, and his most fervent followers see him as this demigod, but Moiraine is fiercely, jealously holding on to the reins, and she and Rand are in this tug-of-war until he finally just jumps off the horse and runs, and there's just such a different dynamic in Book 4. At the beginning of The Shadow Rising, Rand is doing better mentally. That's very obvious. He's sleeping, maybe not a ton, but sleeping way more than he was in the last book, and his dreams are no longer being invaded by the Forsaken. He goes through a period of time where his dreams are his own, at least until he gets to the Waste and the Wise Ones start spying on them, and also Lanfear starts popping up. No wonder once he gets a Forsaken teacher, the first thing that he wants is to learn how to shield his dreams. So while his dreams aren't great, our first introduction into Rand's point of view is actually in a stress dream. Ishamael is gone, and Balal is gone. Nobody is fucking around in his head right now. While I believe that sleep is probably the number one thing that is attributing to Rand's greater mental stability, he also has more support than he did at the beginning of the last book when he's up in the mountains. He has people other than Moiraine that he can go to for help and advice, people that he trusts more because they're not so pushy and they don't have an agenda the way that she seems to. And he has, I think, most importantly of all, a sense of purpose. At the beginning of Book 3, he was feeling this manic, desperate drive to do something. He's like, I have to do something, and I think the right thing to do, or the thing that I want to do, is to go down to all of the Dragonsworn on Almoth Plain and in Terrebonne and Aradomin, because I have a responsibility to them. I declared myself the dragon, and then they were all like, we support you, we are your people, and then massive fighting erupted, and I have to go down there, I have to do something about it, I owe it to them. Even though he logically knew that going down there would change nothing, it would just be a disaster. With multiple different groups of Dragonsworn and everybody fighting everybody, it's chaos in a blender. He would join a single group and everybody would gang up on that group. It was not a viable option, and he knew that, but he was desperate to engage in some manner of action rather than just sit there, and that was the only thing he could think to do. So the whole conflict between him and Moiraine at the beginning of The Dragon Reborn, it's not really that that's what they're fighting over, but that's how their conflict manifests, is that he wants to go down to the Dragonsworn, and she's like, no, that's fucking stupid. And he knows it's fucking stupid. But, as I said in episode 24, he has to fight with somebody or he's going to go nuts, and he picks her because she can take it. He's not going to punch down. He's going to fight with the person who frustrates the shit out of him because she doesn't know how to deal with him, because she's kind of a dumbass. Aes Sedai are dumbasses. They're like the worst example of how to parent a teenager, only they want to parent the world and they're shit at it. So while Rand was in the mountains, he was suffering from mania. He was being tormented in his sleep. He had this tremendous sense of dissatisfaction and this desperate need to do something. And now he's doing stuff. He's much more in control of his life, and that puts him mentally in a much better place. That said, in many ways, Tyr is infinitely more dangerous than anywhere he's ever been before, and any position he has ever found himself in. Trollocs, Fades, and Forsaken are all clear and present dangers, as opposed to the constant undermining and plots of people who smile to your face and want to murder you behind your back. And you have to work with them, and you have to try to rule them, knowing that they're going to attempt to countermand you, and if they can't succeed, possibly kill you. In many ways, Dias Daimar is far more dangerous than Shadowspawn. There is nothing ambiguous about Shadowspawn. None of them smile to your face and try to stab you in the back. You know that they all want to murder you. In Tyr, Rand has to deal with people who claim loyalty but want him dead. And then in the Aiel, he deals with people who will be loyal and want to be loyal, but they're waiting for something. They're waiting for him to do something, and who knows how long they'll wait. After Moiraine has healed Rand from the aftermath of the Bubble of Evil, his horrible sword fight with his doppelgangers, Rand tells everybody to leave, and Perrin and Rourke slip out together into the antechamber. And Perrin comments on the fact that the Aiel don't suck up to Rand the way the Terrans do. He's like, I've never heard any of you kiss his ass, and I've never heard one of you call him Lord Dragon. And it says, the Dragon Reborn is a Wetlander prophecy, Rourke said. Ours is he who comes with the dawn. I thought they were the same. Also, why did you come to the stone? Burn me, Rourke. You Aiel are the people of the dragon, just as the prophecies say. You've as good as admitted it, even if you won't say it out loud. Rourke ignored the last part. In your prophecies of the dragon, the fall of the stone and the taking of Kalimdor proclaim that the dragon has been reborn. Our prophecy says only that the stone must fall before he who comes with the dawn appears to take us back to what was ours. They may be one man, but I doubt even the wise ones could say for sure. If Rand is the one, there are things he must do yet to prove it. What? Perrin demanded. If he is the one, he will know and do them. If he does not, then our search still goes on. Something unreadable in the Aielman's voice pricked Perrin's ears. And if he isn't the one you search for? What then, Rourke? Sleep well and safely, Perrin. Rourke's soft boots made no sound on the black marble as he walked away. The Terran officer was still staring past the maidens, smelling of fear, failing to mask the anger and hatred on his face. If the Aiel decided Rand was not he who comes with the dawn, Perrin studied the Terran officer's face and thought of the maidens not being there, of the stone empty of Aiel, and he shivered. So Rand's position is precarious. The Aiel have been supportive of him and want to be supportive of him, but if he doesn't do the right thing, they're not going to stick around. And along with contending with two-faced rulers who bitterly resent him disrupting the balance of power / interfering with their sovereignty, and allies who will leave him if he doesn't pick the correct next step, he's also faced with Moiraine, who is convinced that she knows what his next move should be, and she is pushing and pushing to get him to go that way. So the pressure on Rand is greater than it has ever been. Rand is at a very interesting place at the start of this book. He has begun to be self-assured, but he still seems quite boyish. Not just in his awkwardness and general demeanor, but in the fact that he's still doing things for fun. When Lanfear comes to him, she has him shielded and blocked from Kalimdor, so he's thinking about other weapons that he can use, and it says that his belt knife is over by a fox that he's been carving. So he's studying books in his room and focusing a ton of energy on that, but he actually takes downtime that's not just working out and practicing the sword with Lon. He has quiet moments where he fucks around and tries to basically whittle himself a toy fox or a knick-knack or whatever. Because Rand is kind of crafty. We know that from the Eye of the World when Tam's filling the stew bowls on winter night and Rand tells us that he carved them himself. And we know it from Egwene's acceptance test. When she's in the way back for what was, and she's seeing her life with Rand and a baby, and says out loud, I want this too, why can't I have this too? He's like, he has a headache, he's holding his head, and he looks up and he's like, what is it that you want? You know, if I can't get it for you, I'll make it. And he says it with this sense of assurance, because he's crafty. But a wooden fox has no practical use, so carving it is simply a pastime that he's engaging in. That is something you do for joy. One of the other examples RJ gives us of Rand engaging in some manner of pleasant diversion is after the channeling lesson Rand has with Elaine and Egwene, where he gets frustrated and has that eruption. He's lighting fires and melting things and exploding his mattress. And after Egwene leaves and he's alone with Elaine, he picks up a bunch of feathers from his destroyed mattress and he offers to make Elaine a flower. And he tells her, I made one for the Mejir last night. You would have thought I had given her the stone. Which I have a mini-sode about on my Patreon because it's a heartbreaking moment of innocence for Rand. Probably one of the last ones that he has, and we don't even get to see it. If I could pick one small, insignificant moment that happens out of view in the books for them to show us in the show, it would be when Rand gives the Mejir the flower he makes from the feathers of his first destroyed mattress. I would love to see that scene, because the picture of this sweet young man giving a gift he made to this older woman who's a servant, an important servant, but still a servant, and the idea of the ruler of Tyr being respectful and almost deferential to an older motherly woman, and almost like, here, Mom, I made you a flower. I want to see the expression on the Mejir's face when Rand gives her that. I want to see embodied in her face the idea of, you would have thought I had given her the stone. But the point I'm trying to make is that Rand has been doing arts and crafts with the one power. He's like, my mattress is destroyed, here's a bunch of feathers, let me fuck around with this and see what I can do if I melt all of these feathers together. I made a flower, that's cool as fuck. And then he presents it to the Mejir as she comes in with her underlings and tries to deal with the shit show of the room covered in blood and feathers and broken glass, all of the detritus of the bubble of evil. And maybe he did it partly just to be a sweetheart and make it less awkward, since he refused to leave the room. He saw staying in the room as a way of casting defiance at the shadow. He refused to be pushed out of it. And it had to be awkward for the servants to do their job with him just standing around. So giving her this gift would have broken tension, and that matters to Rand because he's hyper-aware that being around a man who can channel must be frightening, and he can surmise that the massive changes in Tyr must be frightening, and the Mejir has to be a leader for other servants, and Rand's just respectful that way because he too is a common person, and it's much more boyish and earnest and much less sophisticated than the person he'll be later, while being more empathetic and kind of playful as well. Rand is also still having bouts of self-pity. Perrin comes to confront him after the bubble of evil, thinking that his axe attacking him is Rand having a channeling incident. He sees the effect of the bubble of evil on Rand, and that he looks like he's taken a bath in blood, and his room looks like Katrina blew through it, and as he's giving him first aid, Perrin's like, yo, what the fuck? You almost killed me too, you're an asshole. And Rand's like, I didn't do it, it was one of the Forsaken. And so it says, if one of them came after me as well as you, where's Matt, Rand? If he was alive and went through what I did, he'd be thinking what I did, that it was you. He'd be here by now to bless you out. Or on a horse and halfway to the city gates. Rand struggled to sit erect. Drying blood smears cracked and fresh trickles started on his chest and shoulders. If he is dead, Perrin, you had best get as far from me as you can. I think you and Loyal are right about that. He paused, studying Perrin. You and Matt must wish I had never been born, or at least that you'd never seen me. There was no point in going to check. If anything had happened to Matt, it was over and done now, and he had a feeling that his makeshift bandage pressed against Rand's side might be what kept him alive long enough for Moraine to get there. You don't seem to care if he has gone off. Burn me, he's important too. What are you going to do if he's gone? Or dead, the light send it not so. What they least expect. Rand's eyes looked like morning mist covering the dawn, blue-gray with a feverish glow seeping through. His voice had a knife edge. That is what I have to do in any case, what everyone least expects. Perrin took a slow breath. Rand had a right to taut nerves. It was not a sign of incipient madness. He had to stop watching for signs of madness. Those signs would come soon enough, and watching would do nothing but keep his stomach tied in knots. "What's that?" he asked quietly. Rand closed his eyes. "I only know I have to catch them by surprise. Catch everyone by surprise," he muttered fiercely. So Rand sounds a bit sad, a bit sorry for himself, a bit like he's trying to justify things, and also like he's looking for support and some reassurance, almost like he wants Perrin to be, "No, I don't wish you'd never been born." And Perrin doesn't do that, I think partly because he's just kind of like, "Duh, I don't wish that. Here I am trying to keep you alive because you're my friend. That's why I didn't run away. I came to be like, what the fuck is wrong with you? Because I know you wouldn't have tried to kill me on purpose. Because Perrin is kind, and he isn't going to say, 'You sound fucking sorry for yourself, and it's a bit pathetic,' which is something Matt would say to him. Blunt and, honestly probably more effective. Perrin just chooses not to acknowledge Rand's self-pity. I feel like Matt saying, 'You sound fucking sorry for yourself, shut up,' would probably be better because at least it acknowledges Rand's feelings. Rand's fervency about his needing to catch everybody by surprise, and Perrin's like, his nerves are taut, it doesn't mean he's crazy. It doesn't seem crazy to me. Seth from Watt Spoilers has mentioned more than once that Robert Jordan is on record as saying that he wrote Rand to be real crazy really early on, and that people give him the benefit of the doubt that, he's just strained, he's just overwrought. Those aren't actually signs of insanity for much longer than he deserves. But this thing with him being so fervent about doing what everyone least expects? What is sanity exactly? It's a spectrum, and if a person is functional, where the line is drawn is a matter of opinion. So I know how it feels to be a smidge crazy and facing a snarled problem that makes you feel so overwhelmed, and you're trying to think about it, and it's just like this tornado of different thoughts and ideas, and you can only nail down one thing as you're trying to unfuck the snarl of problems, and it's so nebulous that that's all you can do. You're trying to contemplate it, and there's only one thing you can pin down, and that's what you focus on, like an anchor point, as you then try to unravel the rest of it. And so I get his manic fervor of looking at this gigantic problem and being like, all I know is I have to make sure I take everybody by surprise. So I guess I'm not the one to say whether or not that's crazy, but it makes sense to me. RJ makes it a point to always have Rand be reassuringly human. Even when he gets to the stage where he's a total train wreck, he's often a relatable train wreck. But he's less confident in this book than he is later on, and that makes him even more human, maybe because he still seems so young. And Jordan begins in such a way that from the get-go you're having the Dragon Reborn start off on the wrong foot, dreaming uncomfortable dreams, made really uncomfortable and awkward by a woman. Just having everything show him to be a little bit unqualified for the situation that he's in, like he's unqualified for life. He might be the dragon and the ruler of Tyr, but he is still an awkward virgin, an ignorant shepherd from the middle of nowhere, and someone who can still be fairly easily flustered, depending on circumstances. So, I thought originally that Berylane woke Rand up. She gets into his room while he's sleeping, and I thought that he wakened because of her. But in looking back over the text, I see that his dream, rather than just being an awkward sex dream, is incredibly anxiety-riddled. I got so caught up in Jordan's embarrassing relationship narrative that I was just looking at the scene of Elaine and Min trying to get Rand to go skinny dipping with them, and then Egwene sees them from the shore, and Rand's like, "I can explain." It's just so awkward, because he's setting up Egwene and Rand deciding they don't love each other anymore, and then Egwene will basically hand him off to Elaine the very next day, and it's just so cringy and terrible. And so, because it's so ham-fisted it seems like he did it on purpose to punish someone who insisted he had to have relationships when he didn't want to write them, that I got caught up in that horror, and have been referring to Rand's dream at the beginning of this book as a sex dream, and not really paying attention to the other parts of it. But examining it closely, he's actually having a nightmare, or at the very least a stress dream. When it starts out, he's going through this dark, horrible forest, and Moiraine is stabbing him with a stick, and there are all these evil things in the trees, so just danger and terribleness. Then he runs away, and he's in the skinny dipping dream, which isn't even really that sexy because he feels torn and conflicted, and Egwene catches him, and it's just so cringe. Not just cringe because the relationships in these books are so often cringe, but cringe just because what an uncomfortable situation. And the girls are trying to get him to go skinny dipping with them, and he wants to run after Egwene and explain, and they're like, don't you deserve what you want, Rand? So, it says, he shifted his feet, wanting to move, but unable to decide which way. What he wanted. The words sounded strange. What did he want? He raised a hand to his face to wipe away what felt like sweat. Festering flesh almost obliterated the hair and branded on his palm. White bone shone through red-edged gaps. With a jerk he came awake, lying there shivering in the dark heat. Sweat soaked his small clothes and the linen sheets beneath his back. His side burned where an old wound had never healed properly. He traced the rough scar, a circle nearly an inch across, still tender after all this time. Even Moraine's Aes Sedai healing could not mend it completely. But I'm not rotting yet, and I'm not mad either. Not yet. Not yet. That said it all. He wanted to laugh and wondered if that meant he was a little mad already. So then he considers the dream and the fact that, yeah, he doesn't love Egwene anymore. But instead of telling her he's going to be a chicken shit because he'd rather do that than just be upfront. So it says, he could hide behind what he was. She had to understand that. What man could ask a woman to marry him when he knew he had only a few years if he was lucky before he went insane, before he began to rot alive? He shivered despite the heat. I need sleep. The High Lords would be back in the morning, maneuvering for his favor, for the Dragon Reborn's favor. Maybe I won't dream this time. He started to roll over, searching for a dry place on the sheets, and froze, listening to small rustlings in the darkness. He was not alone. The sword that is not a sword lay across the room beyond his reach, on a throne-like stand the High Lords had given him, no doubt in the hopes he would keep Callandor out of their sight. Someone wanting to steal Callandor. A second thought came, or to kill the Dragon Reborn. He did not need Tom's whispered warnings to know that the High Lord's professions of undying loyalty were only words of necessity. So, Rand's no longer in denial about being the dragon, but he's separating himself from the Dragon Reborn. He thinks that the High Lords are maneuvering for his favor, and then his inner narrative changes it to the Dragon Reborn's favor, because Rand al'Thor is different from the Dragon Reborn. And he concludes that someone's coming to steal Callandor or to kill the Dragon Reborn, not someone is coming to kill me, because they wouldn't kill Rand al'Thor. But at this stage Rand is stressing over a male channeler's fate. He's worrying about rotting alive. Later, you hear that he worries about madness because he's got a job to do. He's like, I can't go crazy yet. I have to be able to keep my sanity together because I have to do this fucking job. So he worries about it for that sake. But he's not necessarily worried about insanity for the fate itself anymore. He doesn't have time to worry about it, and he doesn't figure that it will matter because he's going to die anyway. But at the beginning of Book 4, he's worried not just about insanity, but about the necrosis. Or maybe it's more like gangrene that follows it, which would freak the fuck out of me. Whatever it is, it's fucking horrible. Rand has not yet gotten to the point where his whole life is only about the job that he has to do, and he still has the energy to consider or dread the unpleasantness of his fate, just as he still has the energy to carve little foxes and make flowers for motherly older women. And because he went through Flicker and saw all of the many horrible fates that male channelers could face, he likely remembers enough to have a pretty clear idea of how bad it will be. And it's so very human and very vulnerable to see him worried about an awful fate, a fate that he just doesn't have the energy to worry about later. So, the Rand RJ shows us first thing in The Shadow Rising is very human, and also very young and naive. He has this just horribly uncomfortable and so very Two Rivers interaction with Barrowlane. He's assuming that he's going to get assassins or someone trying to steal his crystal sword, and instead he gets the first of Mayenne. This is just before the cock crows and the bubble of evil hits. He rolls out of bed and channels, and all of the lights go on in the room, and his glowy red sword appears in his hands. It says, after one wide-eyed start, she made a deep, graceful curtsy that drew her garments tight. I am unarmed, my lord dragon. I submit myself to your search if you doubt me. Her smile suddenly made him uncomfortably aware that he wore nothing but his small clothes. I'll be burned if she makes me scramble around trying to cover myself. The thought floated beyond the void. I didn't ask her to walk in on me, to sneak in. Anger and embarrassment drifted along the borders of emptiness too, but his face reddened all the same. Dimly he was aware of it, aware of the knowledge deepening the flush in his cheeks, so coldly calm within the void. Outside, he could feel each individual droplet of sweat sliding down his chest and back. It took a real effort of stubborn will to stand there under her eyes. Search her. The light help me. So he's feeling so awkward and uncomfortable about the fact that he's basically standing there in his undies. He feels incredibly exposed. It says, relaxing his stance, he let the sword vanish, but held the narrow flow connecting him to Sidene. It was like drinking from a hole in a dike when the whole long mound of earth wanted to give way, the water sweet as honeyed wine and sickening as a rivulet through a midden. He did not know much of this woman except that she walked through the stone as if it were her palace in Mayenne. Tom said the first of Mayenne asked questions constantly of everyone, questions about Rand, which might have been natural given what he was, but they made him no easier in his mind. And she had not returned to Mayenne. That was not natural. She had been held captive in all but name for months until his arrival, cut off from her throne and the ruling of her small nation. Most people would have taken the first opportunity to get away from a man who could channel. "What are you doing here?" He knew he sounded harsh and did not care. "There were Aiel guarding that door when I went to sleep. How did you come past them?" Berelane's lips curved up a trifle more. To Rand it seemed the room had gotten suddenly even hotter. "They passed me through immediately when I said I had been summoned by the Lord Dragon." "Summoned? I didn't summon anybody." "Stop this," he told himself. "She's a queen, or the next thing to it. You know as much about the ways of queens as you do about flying." He tried to make himself be civil, only he did not know what to call the first of Mayenne. "My lady." That would have to do. "Why would I summon you at this time of night?" She gave a low, rich laugh deep in her throat. Even wrapped in a motionless emptiness, it seemed to tickle his skin, make the hairs stir on his arms and legs. Suddenly he took in her clinging garb as if for the first time and felt himself go red all over. "She can't mean... Can she? Light, I've never said 2 words to her before." "Perhaps I wish to talk, my Lord Dragon." She let the pale robe fall to the floor, revealing an even thinner white silk garment he could only call a nightgown. It left her smooth shoulders completely bare and exposed a considerable expanse of pale bosom. He found himself wondering distantly what held it up. It was difficult not to stare. "You are a long way from your home, like me. The nights especially seem lonely. Tomorrow I will be happy to talk with you. But during the day people surround you. Petitioners, high lords, Aiel." She gave a shiver. He told himself he really ought to look away, but he could as easily have stopped breathing. He had never before been so aware of his own reactions when wrapped in the void. "The Aiel frighten me, and I do not like Terran lords of any sort." About the Terrans he could believe her, but he did not think anything frightened this woman. "Burn me, she's in a strange man's bedchamber in the middle of the night, only half-dressed, and I'm the one who's jumpy as a cat in a dog run, void or no." It was time to put an end to things before they went too far. "It would be better if you returned to your own bedchamber, my lady." Part of him wanted to tell her to put on a cloak, too, a thick cloak. Part of him did. It really is too late for talking. Tomorrow, in daylight." She gave him a slanted, quizzical look. "Have you absorbed stuffy Terran ways already, my Lord Dragon? Or is this reticence something from your 2 rivers? We are not so formal in Mayenne." "My lady." He tried to sound formal. If she did not like formality, that was what he wanted. "I am promised to Egwene Alfier, my lady." "You mean the Aes Sedai, my Lord Dragon?" If she really is Aes Sedai, she is quite young, perhaps too young to wear the ring and the shawl. Berelaine spoke as if Egwene were a child, though she herself could not be more than a year older than Rand, if that, and he had only a little over 2 years on Egwene. "My Lord Dragon, I do not mean to come between you. Marry her if she is Green Aja. I would never aspire to wed the Dragon Reborn himself. Forgive me if I overstep myself, but I told you we are not so formal in Mayenne. May I call you Rand?" Rand surprised himself by sighing regretfully. There had been a glint in her eye, a slight shift of expression, gone quickly when she mentioned marrying the Dragon Reborn. If she had not considered it before, she had now. The dragon reborn, not Rand al'Thor. The man of prophecy, not the shepherd from the Two Rivers. He was not shocked exactly. Some girls back home mooned over whoever proved himself fastest or strongest in the games at Beltane and Sunday, and now and again a woman set her eyes on the man with the richest fields or the largest flocks. It would have been good to think she wanted Rand al'Thor. So, Rand here is just backward, and he's really naive. But he's real, too, because he is genuinely tempted for half a second. Like, RJ isn't so crude as to say Rand's penis said yes before his brain and his general sensibilities overrode it, but we can assume he goes red all over and he's never before been so aware of his body, and only part of him wants her to put a cloak on, and it's just kind of like he's not seriously tempted, but it's not like he doesn't find her appealing, and I feel like if Rand had more experience, he would be more tempted. I don't think he would go through with it still. He's too suspicious and not going to bone down with a chick he's never had a conversation with before this moment, but he would have had a lot harder time saying no. But as it is, he's just kind of like, what the fuck? I just woke up from a horrible nightmare and you want to come and fuck me and I've never had a conversation with you before? But he also feels genuinely bummed that she's not actually into him. And she tells him because Berylane does not take no for an answer ever, because she's kind of fucking gross like that. But she's like, dude, you gotta know you're fucking hot, right? Come on, let's do it. But even if he had been interested before, now he is so turned off. He's truly disappointed when she wants the Dragon Reborn, and he's still got this dissonance of the Terrans want to come talk to the Dragon Reborn, or somebody is going to want to come kill the Dragon Reborn, because Rand al'Thor is something different. And Rand al'Thor, she's just flat out said, was not who she wanted. As for Berylane, she looks at him and she's like, yeah, he's hot as hell. He looks good. The Terran High Lords hate him, which is immediately a huge turn on. The whole, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. And he's not an asshole. Everything she has heard indicates that he's not an asshole. She's asking questions of everybody, gathering intel, making a risk assessment, and determining, yeah, this would actually probably be a perfectly enjoyable experience. He looks naive, he'd likely be pretty easy to manipulate, and also chances are it would be a fun roll in the hay. He's not crazy yet from everything she can ascertain, so climbing into bed with him is a sound political maneuver. What terrifies her away from Rand is not his channeling. She's not even fazed when he pushes her away behind a wall of air. She won't take no for an answer, and she starts touching him, and so he weaves a wall of air and shoves her away, like puts her in a little air cage, and is just like, get the fuck away from me. It doesn't matter if I've got a half-chub, no means no. But even this aggressive rebuff with the one power does not upset her. She merely apologizes and attempts to be more diplomatic and approaches her subduction from a different angle, but does not give up. But the bubble of evil striking him, and I think especially its particular nature, because what is more creepy than doppelgangers, even before you add in the part where he has to absorb them to defeat them? So that when he goes to unravel the shield or the little air cage after he gets rid of them, she's like, which one are you? And he's like, the only one there is, the one you were treating like we were betrothed. Like, he's trying to inject a tiny bit of humor because it was so horrifying. And she is not amused. She's just like, I'm sorry. She was mentally prepared to deal with a man channeling, but the bubble of evil was a bridge too far, and proof positive to her that being close to the Dragon Reborn is not worth the risk. So she nopes the fuck out and decides, I'm just gonna hook up with one of his friends instead. And she ends up picking Perrin, because you see a scene where Matt walks by her, and he gives her this great bow, and when she doesn't acknowledge him, he yells after her, I distinctly heard myself speak. If I pinch your bottom, you can slap my face, but until then, I expect a civil word for a civil word. And she looks back and considers him for a second, and then he hears her mutter, too much like me. So Perrin ends up being the one. Poor Perrin. So, however bonerific Berylane might have found Rand, however much she might have enjoyed teaching him a few things, her calculations are political, and his saying no isn't enough because she doesn't understand that word, but the bubble of evil sure is. And then she fervently begs his forgiveness, partly because she's terrified, but also almost as if to make sure that he doesn't change his mind and decide that he wants to take her up on her offer at the last minute, since she has decided she is no longer interested. Then she goes to leave and says, "I'll send the Aiel to get the Aes Sedai," but he tells her, don't tell anybody. And it says, limping to the foot of the bed, he lowered himself onto the chest there and laid Callandor across his knees, bloody hands resting on the glowing blade. With that in his hands, even one of the Forsaken would fear him. In a moment, he would send for more rain to heal his wounds. In a moment, he would speak to the Aiel outside and become the dragon reborn again. But for now, he only wanted to sit and remember a shepherd named Rand al'Thor. And him wanting to sit and remember being Rand is as much for Berylane and the fact that she came seeking advantage and left mortally terrified of him, because he thinks to himself that she would as soon be in a room with the Dark One himself now. I think that, just as much as all of the responsibilities weighing on him, makes him think, I just want to sit here and remember a shepherd named Rand al'Thor. I wish that Berylane did not have boundary issues, because she's otherwise a really likable character. And I appreciate that RJ has her in the stone to show the contrast between a ruler who welcomes Rand in an admittedly mercenary way since he can do something for her, and those who hate and oppose him. So technically the fall of the stone liberated her. The High Lords had been keeping her as a guest for months. At the end of The Dragon Reborn, Lon mentions to Perrin as one of the proofs that Rand is in Tyr and his ta'veren has been ta'verening everywhere is that the first of Mayenne has said she'll submit to the will of the High Lords after saying yesterday that she'll see Mayenne and all of its ships burn before a single Terran country lord sets foot on Mayenner's soil. Berylane is great because there's nothing simple about her. She's smart and politically savvy, she has poise and dignity, and she can pull herself together even after experiencing the most frightening thing in her life, which is awesome. After Perrin and Fael deal with the axe, Perrin's like, what the fuck? I'm gonna go and tell Rand he's an asshole for making this happen to me. Let's go. And so they're up the long hallway going towards the antechamber when they come across High Lord Torian, who is the richest of all of the High Lords. He's one of the ones that Rand will send up into Cairhien, and the one that he makes finance the whole thing. His son Estienne is one of Mat's biggest generals in the Band of the Red Hand, and both of them are often described as potato-faced. So Torian creeps on Berylane, and he creeps on Fael a bit when the two of them come across him and a couple of his bodyguards, and Perrin can't resist needling him a little bit because he thinks he's a piece of shit. So he's just kind of like, hey, how nice of you to guard the Lord Dragon's rest. A lot of people would resent him being here. And then Perrin and Fael leave Torian to head toward Rand's room, and Berylane passes them coming from there. And then it says, as Berylane rushed past them without a glance, the smell of fear, rank and raw as a festering wound, made his nostrils twitch. Beside this, Torian's fear was nothing. This was mad panic tied with a frayed rope. He straightened slowly, staring after her. "Filling your eyes?" Fael asked softly. Intent on Berylane, wondering what had driven her so near the brink, he spoke without thinking. She smelled of... Far down the corridor, Torian suddenly stepped out of a side hallway to seize Berylane's arm. He was talking at torrent, but Perrin could not make out more than a handful of scattered words, something about her overstepping herself in her pride, and something else that seemed to be Torian offering her his protection. Her reply was short, sharp, and even more inaudible, delivered with lifted chin. Pulling herself free roughly, the first of Mayenne walked away, back straight and seemingly more in command of herself. On the point of following, Torian saw Perrin watching. Dabbing at his nose with his handkerchief, the High Lord vanished back into the crossing corridor. So, Berylane is kind of an awesome character. She holds her shit together and has done really well, especially considering she's having to navigate through all of these gross, entitled men. She's been their prisoner for months. And that makes her really likable in so many different ways, and I hate that Elaine, Egwene, and Nynaeve slut-shame her so much. But her endless sexual harassment of Perrin makes her utterly intolerable, because her behavior is not okay. Being sexually predatory is not simply an obnoxious personality trait that one can overlook. It's not mild arrogance, or a tendency toward pomposity, or neediness. It's unforgivable, and I wish that Robert Jordan had not written her with a predilection toward stalking and sexual harassment. Her inability to observe boundaries and the fuckery that inflicts upon Perrin and Fael's relationship is just really shit, and it's not cool. But however gross Berylane can be, Torian is grosser. Yet she stays behind in the stone rather than going back to her country, because Rand presents an unequaled opportunity for her to maybe not have to deal with Torian and his equally disgusting peers ever again, or at least for her to be in a much better bargaining position. Rand finds the High Lords just as gross. The morning after we first join all of our heroes in the stone, Egwene and Elaine decide they will go and try to help him a bit with channeling. And also Egwene officially breaks up with him and passes him off to Elaine like a relay baton. When the girls arrive at Rand's door, Egwene tells the Aiel, "Hey, we're here to check on Rand's wounds," and Gall's like, "Yeah, they might be troubling him." It says, "He has chased off a group of these High Lords already, and threw one of them out himself." "What was his name?" "Dorian," another, even taller man replied. He had an arrow nocked, the short curved bow held almost casually. His gray eyes rested on the two women for an instant, then went back to searching among the Andarim's columns. "Torian," Gall agreed. "I thought he would slide as far as those pretty carvings." He pointed a spear to the ring of stiff-standing defenders, "but he came short by 3 paces. I lost a good Terran hanging, all hawks and gold thread to Mangan." The taller man gave a brief, contented smile. Egwene blinked at the image of Rand physically pitching a High Lord across the floor. He had never been violent. Far from it. How much had he changed? So this is our first nod to Rand beginning to have serious anger issues, which we are immediately treated to another fine example of during his lesson with Egwene and Elaine, which doesn't go particularly well. He ruins another mattress, and melts some gaudy knickknacks, and lights things on fire, and gets a little upset. And then, after the lesson is over, but before Egwene breaks off the engagement, Rand says to them, by way of letting them know that he's busy and they should fuck off, "I do need to tell the High Lords a few things about taxes this morning. They seem to think they can take as much from a farmer in a poor year as a good without beggaring him." So, I'm guessing that once he drew Kalendor and maybe had a night's sleep and then woke up in the morning to his new job, Rand probably looked at the way everything was set up in Tyr and saw that this was a country designed to be shitty for ordinary people, and was kind of like, well, if I'm going to be the dragon, I'm going to be a good dragon, and obviously this is my country to rule now, because that's how it seems set up. If Kalendor was waiting for me to draw it, the stone fell, it's mine now. Tyr is mine. So he was like, okay, I'm going to unfuck this as fast as possible, because the way this country is run is bullshit. Matt's playing cards when the bubble of evil strikes him. He's playing cards with a whole bunch of the lordlings, and Torian's son Estian is complaining to Matt about Rand's proclamation that commoners can bring lords before a magistrate. And he's like, "You'll talk to him about it. You'll talk to him, right?" And Matt's like, "Oh, yeah, it would be such a fucking shame if you'd have to face consequences for your actions when you guys act like pieces of shit. How terrible for you." And Matt makes it very, very clear that he has no sympathy for them whatsoever and is 100% on Rand's side, and obliquely tells Estian to go fuck himself. Rand works really hard. He's in the stone for, I'm pretty sure it's 25 days, maybe 24. I can't decide if when RJ talks about 3 days going by, he includes the day after the bubble of evil in those 3. But regardless, in that time, Rand does everything that he can, and he still feels shitty about himself that he can't do more, because he has to leave. He has to figure out what his next move is and make a choice and go somewhere and do something. But he doesn't feel good about it. As he and Matt and Egwene and the rest are making their way toward the portal stone, it says, "The last dregs of the city gave way to country and pitiful scattered farms. Not even a conger or a coplin, 2 Rivers folk notorious for laziness among other things, would keep a place as run down and ramshackle as these rough stone houses, walls slanting as if about to topple over on the chickens scratching in the dirt. Sagging barns leaned against laurels or spicewoods. Roofs of cracked and broken slates all looked as if they leaked. Goats bleated disconsolately in stone pens that might have been thrown together hastily that morning. Barefoot men and women hoed stoop-shouldered in unfenced fields, not looking up even when the large party was passing. Redbeaks and thrushes warbling in the small thickets were not enough to lighten the feel of oppressive gloom. I have to do something about this. No, not now. First things first. I've done what I could for them in a few weeks. I can't do anything more now." He tried not to look at the tumble-down farms. Were the olive groves in the south as bad? The people who worked those did not even own the land. It all belonged to the High Lords. No, the breeze. Nice the way it cuts the heat. I can enjoy it a bit longer. Rand is a common person, and these are his people. He can identify with all of the common people of Tyr, which is one of the reasons why he appeals to the Mashir. He gives her a handcrafted, or I guess power-crafted, flower, and you'd think he gave her the stone. It's one of the reasons why the servants are already on Rand's side, as Tom Maryland is going around the morning after the Trolloc attack, and he's fomenting discord and suspicion against the nobility, but it almost isn't necessary. The servants tell him the Lord Dragon saved us, and Tom just kind of subtly reinforces that by planting suggestions of how the High Lords must have been in on it, or at the very least asleep at the wheel. There's a real undercurrent that the people feel like the dragon is on their side. In the very beginning of Chapter 2 it says, "The streets of the city, the taverns and inns were all but empty in the muggy darkness, people keeping cautiously within their own walls. Who held the stone was Lord of Tyr, city and nation. That was the way it had always been, and the people of Tyr accepted it always. By daylight they would cheer their new lord with enthusiasm as they had cheered the old. By night they huddled together, shivering despite the heat when the wind howled across their rooftops like 1,000 keening mourners. Strange new hopes danced in their heads, hopes none in Tyr had dared for 100 generations, hopes mixed with fears as old as the breaking. So it's like, hey, life might stop sucking for the little guy. We're scared of this male channeler, but at the same time, he's one of us, and he's working hard to make things better for us. And so Rand makes himself loved. And mostly RJ doesn't show us that, or he only shows us in small bits and pieces, but it makes sense that as much as people fear him, many do love him. It especially makes sense here. And he has such a powerful sense of responsibility toward them. The laws in Tyr outrage him. He can't bear the casual cruelty that is just part of the fabric of the culture that people take for granted. He despises the staggering ignorance that the High Lords have. They think they know so much, and the gaps in their knowledge just astound him. They are the embodiment of privileged people who see equality as oppression. Rand is in a unique position to be especially outraged by the Terran High Lords being made rich on the backs of the working class. These farmers he is passing are lucky enough to own their own land, and their houses are falling down because the High Lords are insisting on the same amount of taxation, no matter how much the farmers earn. So it's like, how indebted are they? If they have a shitty crop, are they having to borrow money to pay their taxes? Is that why they can't afford building materials to do basic repairs? I'm guessing so. I'm guessing that even in a good year, most farmers never earn enough to get themselves out of debt, especially if they have to borrow money from unscrupulous people who charge exorbitant interest rates. The Two Rivers doesn't have taxes, and I wonder how they deal with roads and other public works. There's like 2 or 3 bridges in Emmons Field, and then there's the road, and I don't know if it's just like everybody volunteers and works on it together. The quarry road is described as really overgrown, so I'm guessing nobody works on that. But maybe the North Road/Old Road gets enough travel to keep it somewhat roady? I don't know. But the lack of taxes in the Two Rivers allows Rand to kind of approach all of this country running from a position of pure reason. Yeah, there's a lot that he doesn't know, but he's like, well, I can learn this, and this, and this. And as he learns, he's perfectly willing to throw out things that don't make any sense, and just approach it by asking himself, what's the kind thing? What's the compassionate thing? And when all else fails, he makes decisions when it comes to running a country with utter contempt for classism. He is so untroubled by letting the Aiel take the fifth, because he's just kind of like, why should I help the Terran High Lords hold on to all this shit that they stole from their people? How much of the tax money is actually getting invested into public works and infrastructure, and how much of it is going into High Lords' pockets? He suspects it's quite a lot, and I'm sure he's not wrong. Because of Rand's contempt for these elitists, you almost couldn't pick a better country for him to start out being the leader of, because he has to frighten the powerful into following him but he will always have the loyalty of the little people because he did things to make their lives better, and his laws will stay even once he's gone because the people in power fear him. We get a great commentary from Elaine as she is leaving Rand after making out with him for the first time. Rand has to talk to the High Lords about taxes, and so she leaves, and as she does, she observes a tall, broad-shouldered young man in a plain green coat among the High Lords in their silks and satin stripes. Rand looked like a stork among peacocks, yet there was something about him, a presence that said he commanded there by right. The Terrans recognized it, bending their stiff necks reluctantly. He thought probably they bowed just because he was the dragon reborn, and perhaps they thought so too. But she had seen men like Gareth Bryn, the captain commander of her mother's guards, who could have dominated a room in rags, with no title and no one knowing their name. Rand might not know it, but he was such a man. He had not been when she first saw him, but he was now. Rand is changing. He's growing into his power, and the High Lords hate it. This uneducated teenage farmer has usurped their right to rule. They're in a position, like dark friends are, where the very nature of their place in the world forces them to brush against the notion of Tarmon Guyton. As a dark friend, if you swear your soul to the Dark One, you can't do that without thinking about the last battle and the end of the world, because you are doing it technically to aid the Dark One when he breaks free, and the last battle comes. That's just part of the job description. You're supposed to be on call should Tarmon Guyton come in your lifetime. Similarly, the High Lords in guarding the stone and guarding Kalandor, and having that be part of their job and part of their identity, they too brush against the notion of Tarmon Guyton, but they never think that it's going to happen in their lifetime, and so when it does, and it turns out the dragon is a commoner rather than a piece of shit like them who will help them increase their wealth and power, it kinda sucks. The Wheel of Time companion says of the High Lords of Tyr, acting as a council, the High Lords were historically the rulers of the nation of Tyr, which had neither king nor queen until shortly before the last battle. Their numbers were not fixed and varied over the years from as many as 20 to as few as 6. Although noble women of high rank, high ladies were numbered among the ruling council and had as much power and influence as the men from the beginning, the ruling nobles were referred to collectively as the High Lords. I can come up with 17 total High Lords and ladies. At the end of The Dragon Reborn, it makes mention of the few surviving High Lords, but RJ must have walked it back. We never hear about any specific High Lords actually dying beyond the High Lord Salmon, who we know as Balal. If the Forsaken impersonating a High Lord was the only one killed, then there were 18 High Lords before. If there were the maximum 20, 2 unnamed High Lords died. It doesn't really matter, as I'm only concerned with the ones that are alive at the start of the Shadow Rising. The High Lord Darlin is the one Mat knocks unconscious as he's fighting his way into the stone. Darlin flees the stone, is considered in rebellion, and eventually becomes the king of Tyr. Asterol is an elderly High Lord who we hear about during Mat's card game when Adorian asked Estian which of Asterol's daughters he'll marry, and Estian suggests Medore, who later on is a member of Shafai-Yil. Wiraman, who we don't meet until the Fires of Heaven, is described as a banty rooster. He loves the charge, and we learn that he's a dark friend later on after Rand has his epiphany in Veins of Gold, and suddenly he can just see to the heart of people, and he comes to the Stone of Tyr, and he calls out Wiraman, along with the High Lady Aniella. And we don't meet her until the Path of Daggers, when Rand has his ingathering of lords and ladies and their levies and brings them all to Ilion to fight the Shanshan. And she's upset because her master of horse ends up dying, and there's a suggestion that she was boning down with him, which the scandal, because he's a commoner. The other 2 High Ladies are Altima and Astanda. The day before Rand leaves for Rhuidean, Altima non-fatally poisons her husband, the High Lord Tadosian, for killing her lover, the High Lord Carlian. Rand will order her to Cairhien to oversee food distribution and move Tadosian into High Lady Astanda's apartments so they can plot vengeance. Faced with that, Altima will flee to Andor instead and seek out Morghese for aid. We get a small POV from her in Chapter 1 of The Fires of Heaven, and she becomes a thrall of Raven. High Lord Talmarin isn't in the stone when it falls. We learn this when we meet him early on in Lord of Chaos, as Rand is talking to all of the lords that are gathered on the plains of Moredo for his army that's supposedly going to be invading Ilion. And they break the news to him that the High Lords Hearn and Saman have rebelled and gone to join Darlin. And Hearn and Saman, those two rebellious fellows, are two of the 7 High Lords that Rand sends up into Rhuidean just before he leaves for Rhuidean, the other 5 being Gwayam, Ericombe, Maricon, Potato-Faced Torian, and Mylon. And the final High Lord is Sunaman, who we first hear as he, Mylon, a not-yet-murdered Carlian, and a not-yet-poisoned Tadosian trade places with Elaine. It says, "My Lord Dragon?" Sunaman murmured even more diffidently than usual. Word of this morning must have spread through the stone already. That first lot had nearly run on their way out, and it was doubtful Torian would show his face or his filthy suggestions anywhere Rand was. Sunaman essayed an ingratiating smile, then smothered it, dry-washing his plump hands when Rand only looked at him. The rest pretended they did not see the burned tables or the shattered mattress and scattered books or the half-melted lumps over the fireplace that had been the stag and wolves. High Lords were good at seeing only what they wanted to see. Carlian and Tadosian, false self-effacement in every line of their thick bodies, surely never realized there was anything suspicious in never looking at one another. But then Rand might never have noticed if not for Tom's note, found in the pocket of a coat just back from being brushed. "The Lord Dragon wished to see us?" And in between all of this, there is an inner narrative of Rand thinking about women. He's thinking about Elaine and Egwene and all of that, and I'm not going to read that. So, it says, "Taxes," he barked. The Terrans did not move, but they gave the impression of stepping back. How he hated dealing with these men. He wanted to dive back into the books. "It is a bad precedent, my Lord Dragon, lowering taxes," a lean, gray-haired man said in an oily voice. Mylon was tall for a Terran, only a hand shorter than Rand and hard as any defender. He held himself in a stoop in Rand's presence. His dark eyes showed how he hated it, but he had hated it when Rand told them to stop crouching around him too. None of them straightened, but Mylon especially had not liked being reminded of what he did. The peasants have always paid easily, but if we lower their taxes when the day comes that we raise them back to where they are now, the fools will complain as bitterly as if we had doubled the present levy. There might well be riots when that day comes, my Lord Dragon." Rand strode across the room to stand before Callandor. The crystal sword glittered, outshining the gilt and gemstones surrounding it, a reminder of who he was, of the power he could wield. "You will have riots if you drive men off their farms." 3 books stood in a stack almost by Mylon's feet. The Treasures of the Stone of Tyr, Travels in the Waste, and Dealings with the Territory of Mayenne. The keys lay in those, and in the various translations of the Carethan cycle, if he could only find them and fit them to the proper locks. He pushed his mind back to the High Lords. "Do you think they will watch their families starve and do nothing?" "The defenders of the stone have put down riots before, my Lord Dragon," Sunaman said soothingly. "Our own guards can keep peace in the countryside. The peasants will not disturb you, I give you my assurance." "There are too many farmers as it is." Carlian flinched at Rand's glare. "It is the civil war in Rhuidean, my Lord Dragon," he explained hurriedly. "The Rhuidean can buy no grain, and the granaries are bursting. This year's harvest will go to waste as it is. And next year? Burn my soul, my Lord Dragon, but what we need is for some of those peasants to stop their eternal digging and planting." He seemed to realize he had said too much, though he clearly did not understand why. Rand wondered whether he had any idea how food got to his table. Did he see anything but gold and power? "What will you do when Rhuidean is buying grain again?" Rand said coolly. "For that matter, is Rhuidean the only land that needs grain?" "My Lord Dragon," Mylon said, half subservient, half as if explaining something to a child. "If the civil wars stopped today, Rhuidean still could not buy more than a few barge loads for 2, even 3 years. We have always sold our grain to Rhuidean. Always. For the 20 years since the Aiel War. They were so bound up in what they had always done that they could not see what was so simple, or would not see it. When the cabbages sprouted like weeds around Emmons Field, it was a near certainty that bad rain or whiteworm had struck Devon Ride or Watch Hill. When Watch Hill had too many turnips, Emmons Field would have a shortage, or Devon Ride. Offer it in Ilion, he told them, or Altara. You have ships for the sea as well as riverboats and barges, and if you don't have enough, hire them from Mayenne. Pay with grain. I'm sure the first will be amenable for a good price, and maybe a signed agreement, a treaty. That was a good word, the sort they used, pledging to leave Mayenne alone in return for ships. He owed her that. We trade little with Ilion, my lord dragon. They are vultures and scum. Tadosian sounded scandalized, and so did Mylon when he said, We have always dealt with Mayenne from strength, my lord dragon, never with bent knee. Rand took a deep breath. The High Lords tensed. It always came to this. He always tried to reason with them, and it always failed. Tom said the High Lords had heads as hard as the stone, and he was right. First, you will cut taxes on farmers by 3/4 and on everyone else by half. Don't argue, just do it. Second, you go to Barrelane and ask her price for hiring. The High Lords listened with false smiles and grinding teeth, but they listened. Oh, Rand, just imagine trying to explain vaccines and masks to the willfully ignorant. His rage and frustration is so relatable. So, RJ gives us this time in the Stone of Tyr. And it's significant. It's 21 chapters, so more than a third of the chapters in the book. He does this to fill in where everybody is, sketch out their arcs, and then send all of them their separate ways. He manages a lot of character and story development with it, including tertiary characters like Barrelane, even though we're in one place for just a handful of days. He makes great use of his ability to do world building while standing still, to show Rand in his nascent ruler stage, to give us a reasonable picture of what ruling Tyr is like, and to have Rand figure out his next step. But it also, honestly, pretty brilliantly sets the stage for a relatively smooth takeover of Ilion. Once Rand gets rid of Samael, or I guess technically Mashadar gets rid of Samael for him, but once Rand heads back to Ilion, and Matin Stepanios is freshly gone because Elida kidnapped him. So the Council of Nine meets Rand, and they're like, yeah, our king is MIA, so we talked, and basically you've been sending us grain this whole time, when everybody would have starved otherwise because Lord Brand, aka Samael, gave all of Ilion's food to his soldiers, and the assemblage and the king, who Elida doesn't kidnap until shortly before Rand comes for Samael, are getting these grain shipments from Rand on the side, and so because food is coming from Tyr, or it's probably more likely that it's coming from Mayenne since Samael raised the embargo on ships and cargo to and from Tyr, but either way, food is coming from the Dragon Reborn, apparently totally beneath Samael's notice. Having multiple branches of government is a good thing. And without that food, people would have starved to death. And so when Rand comes back from Shadar Logoth, the Council of Nine is like, yeah, we don't know where our king is, but we're assuming Lord Brand murdered him, and since people are loyal to you here, your name is on people's lips with the light is more or less what Lord Gregoran says. We offer you our crown. Because Rand sent that food from a place of pure goodwill. He knew that Ilion was under Samael's control, but he's not about to let good food go to waste. He'll offer it wherever. Ilion, Altara, who cares? He'll send it free of charge rather than let it rot or be eaten by rats. He's determined to make good use of it, not even really considering a long game like the idea that it might earn him a throne in half a year's time. But in order to do that, in order to get what he wants, Rand basically has to go full dragon. He tries to reason with the Terran High Lords, but they are impervious to reason, and so he has to be someone he doesn't want to be. 3 or 4 days pass from when he tells Mylon, Sunaman, Carlian, and Tadosian that he wants them to make a treaty with Mayenne so they can have enough shipping capabilities to get that grain where it can be of use. In the meantime, Tom Merrilyn's plot for Tadosian to discover that Carlian is boning his wife, the High Lady Altima, has come to fruition. Only Mylon and Sunaman remain to present the rough draft of their treaty to Rand, because Carlian has died earlier in the day in a hunting accident, and then Tadosian, fresh back from that job well done, is poisoned by Altima. So they're not there for this little fuckery here, which is one of my favorite scenes in the entire series. It says, Rand stared at Mylon and Sunaman, then tossed the thick bundle of large vellum sheets at them. A treaty, all neatly scribed, lacking only signatures and seals. It hit Mylon in the chest, and he caught it by reflex. He bowed as if honored, but his tight smile revealed clenched teeth. Sunaman shifted from foot to foot, dry-washing his hands. "All is as you said, my Lord Dragon," he said anxiously. "Grain for ships, and 2,000 Terran levies," Rand cut him off, "to see to proper distribution of the grain and protect Terran interests." His voice was like ice, but his stomach seemed to be boiling. He nearly shook with the desire to pound at these fools with his fists. 2,000 men, under the command of Torian. "The High Lord Torian has an interest in affairs with Mayenne, my Lord Dragon," Mylon said smoothly. "He has an interest in forcing his attentions on a woman who won't look at him," Rand shouted. "Grain for ships, I said. No soldiers, and certainly no bloody Torian. Have you even spoken to Barrelane?" They blinked at him as if they did not understand the words. It was too much. He snatched at Saidin. The vellum in Mylon's arms erupted into flame. With a yell, Mylon hurled the fiery bundle into the bare fireplace and hurriedly brushed at sparks and scorch marks on his red silk coat. Sunaman stared at the burning sheets, which were crackling and turning black, with his mouth hanging open. "You will go to Barrelane," he told them, surprised at how calm his voice was. "By tomorrow midday you will have offered her the treaty I want, or by sunset tomorrow I'll hang both of you. If I have to hang high lords every day, 2 by 2, I will. I will send every last one of you to the gallows if you won't obey me. Now get out of my sight." The quiet tone seemed to affect them more than his shouting had. Even Mylon looked uneasy as they backed away, bowing at every other step, murmuring protestations of undying loyalty and everlasting obedience. They sickened him. "Get out!" he roared, and they abandoned dignity, almost fighting with one another to pull the doors open. They ran. One of the Aiel guards put his head in for a moment to see that Rand was all right before drawing the door shut. Rand trembled openly. They disgusted him almost as much as he disgusted himself, threatening to hang men because they did not do as he told them. Worse, meaning it. He could remember when he did not have a temper, or at least when he rarely had, and had managed to keep it on a short rein. He crossed the room to where Callandor sparkled with the light streaming in between the draperies. The blade looked like the finest glass, absolutely clear. It felt like steel to his fingers, sharp as a razor. He had come close to reaching for it to deal with Mylon and Sunaman. Whether to use it as a sword or for its real purpose he did not know. Either possibility horrified him. "I am not mad yet, only angry. Light so angry." Just before we get this interaction, RJ gives us this unusual collection of paragraphs where he transitions from point of view to point of view to point of view without doing any kind of page breaks, which is not something he normally does. He runs through each of our main characters and how they've spent their time over the course of 3 days. And when he gets to Rand, it says, "He met with high lords in his chambers and issued orders. He startled them by appearing at secret gatherings of 3 or 4 that Tom had ferreted out, just to reiterate some point from his last commands. They smiled and bowed and sweated and wondered how much he knew. A use had to be found for their energy before one of them decided that if Rand could not be manipulated, he must be killed. Whatever it took to divert them, he would not start a war. If he had to confront Samael, so be it, but he would not start a war." So, Rand won't start a war, which is what Moiraine has been pushing him to do, because she is desperate for him to do something, and she's decided that that is the best move. So, when we're first in Rand's head in Chapter 2, he is sleeping, and he's having his 3-part stress dream. And first, it says, "Through a shadowy forest, Moiraine was prodding him with a sharp stick toward where the Amerlin seat waited, sitting on a stump with a rope halter for his neck in her hands. Dim shapes moved half-seen through the trees, stalking, hunting him. Here a dagger blade flashed in the failing light. Over there he caught a glimpse of ropes ready for binding. Slender, and not as tall as his shoulder, Moiraine wore an expression he had never seen on her face. Fear. Sweating, she prodded harder, trying to hurry him to the Amerlin's halter. Dark friends of the Forsaken in the shadows, the White Tower's leash ahead and Moiraine behind. Dodging Moraine's stick, he fled. So Moiraine has a plan for him, and she is dismissive of his actions and the choices that he's making right now, partly because she is of the opinion that he is choosing not to decide. And so she's just kind of nagging at him and basically not being helpful. She's not being a supportive mom right now. When Rand gathers everybody into the heart of the stone for his announcement, where he's like, I'm leaving. Here, I'm thrusting the sword back into the stone. You get Moraine's narrative as she's waiting with the assembled nobles for Rand to join them. And she's thinking about Tom and about the whole fallout with High Lord Carlion and High Lord Tadosian, which she used as the stick to subtly threaten Tom before giving him the carrot and saying, if you go to Tanchico with Elaine, I'll give you names of Red Sisters and you can great game them into oblivion. And so she's thinking that it was dumb of Tom to great game Carlion and Tadosian into death and disability because Ultima is far more dangerous and would have been a more appropriate target. And it says, for an instant she regretted sending Tom away. She did not like having to waste her time with these petty affairs, but he had too much influence with Rand. The boy had to depend on her counsel, hers and hers alone. The Light knew he was difficult enough without interference. Tom had been settling the boy down to rule Tyr when he needed to be moving on to greater things. Whether Tom really had been settling Rand down, or just taking pride in a job well done, who can say? But Tom was just like, I'm going to help this kid. I was on Rand's side when I just thought he was some poor asshole who could channel who was going to be used by the Aes Sedai. I find out he's the dragon, and here I am in my element, playing Dias Daimar, sitting in the servants' quarters, forging notes, and practicing all my different hands, using my ability to carve different seals and cultivate spies and whisper in ears, hardcore cloak and dagger shit, where you know that Tom's probably having the most fun he's had in a long fucking time. And he's helping Rand, helping him and giving him really good advice. What he's doing for Rand is great. So he may or may not have been settling him down, but either way he was helping him rule the stone effectively while he was there. So it's just kind of like, what really does she have to complain about? She makes lots of assumptions, which all of us do when we move through our world day to day. We have to make assumptions based upon the information that we have. But Moiraine decides that she's going to try to get rid of all of Rand's other allies because he has to depend upon her counsel and hers alone, and it's just another example of Moiraine being entitled and a hardcore dumbass. And in this point of view, Moiraine sounds annoyed and judgmental and like she's over all of this bullshit, but she has had a rough few days with Rand. He's been a dick to her the couple of times that we've seen them talking to each other, and we see her complaining about him behind his back. Nothing that RJ tells us about their relationship indicates that they've made up, so it's almost like she's doing damage control because he got away from her, she followed, and she saved his life by bale-firing Balal, but that also means that she's there again, so he's stuck with her, pushy and annoying and overbearing and insistent once again. And she's in this place like she was before, where she had time away from him. You know, she had him and had a reasonable assessment of him, and then in the Great Hunt, she went on her research trip to Vandina Dedalius's house and was away from him for several months, and got back with him and then was like, wow, this problem has morphed and become more uncontrollable in the time that we've been apart. Now it's the same thing, but much worse. He's not contained the way she had him contained before in this kind of isolated spot in the mountains. Now he's down in the real world doing real world things. He won't listen to her, he doesn't want to take her advice, and he will not share his planning with her. It's like not only does she not get to make the plans, he's going to make the plans and he's not fucking telling her what they are. Partly out of paranoia and just partly out of tit for tat. She's getting tit for tat from Rand just like she got tit for tat from Perrin in the last book. When she comes to heal him after he's been attacked by the bubble of evil, as she's talking to him afterward, it says, "Your time is running out, Rand," Moiraine said. "The Tarans are becoming used to you after a fashion, and no one fears what is familiar as much as what is strange. How many weeks or days before someone tries to put an arrow in your back or poison in your food? How long before one of the Forsaken strikes or another bubble comes sliding along the pattern? Don't try to harry me, Moiraine." He was blood-filthy, half-naked, more than half leaning on Callandor to stay sitting up, but he managed to fill those words with quiet command. "I will not run for you, either." "Choose your way soon," she said, "and this time inform me what you mean to do. My knowledge cannot aid you if you refuse to accept my help." Your help? Rand said wearily. I'll take your help, but I will decide, not you. So he basically tells everybody to fuck off. He's like, I want to be alone. I want to go to sleep. And so as she's leaving, it says, the Aes Sedai turned back to Rand. We will talk tomorrow. You cannot sit like a partridge waiting for a hunter's net. She was moving for the door before Rand could reply. Lon looked at Rand as if about to say something, but followed her without speaking. Rand, Perrin said, we do what we have to. Rand did not look up from the clear hilt between his hands. We all do what we have to. He smelled afraid. So, he had enough of her controlling his life in the mountains, and now he has permanently slipped the leash. He can't make her go away, or at least he won't do what he would have to do to make her go away. But he can continually reinforce that she is not in charge, and the more she pushes, the less she gets what she wants, which is my go-to way of dealing with pushy people. It's kind of how RJ set it up from the get-go. He lets you know right away in the first few pages of the first book, like a lot of Two Rivers people, Rand had a strong stubborn streak. He hated being pushed into anything. And maybe Rand isn't so obstinate that he actually enjoys not giving her what she wants, but if he's dug in, he's not going to give, and she's really on the struggle bus with that, and I don't feel bad for her. But Moiraine has had these 20 days before Chapter 2 begins, where she's running around building a spy network, trying to keep tabs on everybody, working really hard to try to get herself back into a position of influence with Rand, and not having a lot of luck. You know, she was very frustrated over the course of The Dragon Reborn, and not very serene by the end of it, and she's kind of got her shit back together again, but she's still pretty unhappy. She leaves Rand after healing him, and the next we see her is actually our first Elaine point of view. Moiraine basically bursts into the room where the girls have been interrogating Amiko Nagoyan and Joya Bayir, and she's sort of like, Rand al'Thor is a stubborn fucking asshole, and I could fucking drown him. She is so agitated, she doesn't even realize that the Black Aja sisters are still there. But she gets it together until the Dark Friends are sent away, and then begins complaining vociferously about Rand to the girls. And she actually gives them quite a lot of details when they press her for information, which I don't know if it's a mischaracterization or not, because Moiraine has been pretty stressed out over the course of the last book, but it also does seem that way just because she never tells anybody anything. But the bottom line is that Moiraine being in a sharing mood is the only way to get information about the doorframe ter'angreal to Mat. Also, I don't know if it's totally unbelievable that she would tell them this stuff. Anyway, Egwene asks Moiraine what in particular Rand is being stubborn about, and it says, he must move, the Aes Sedai said at last. Instead he sits here, and the Terrans already begin to lose their fear of him. He sits here, and the longer he sits doing nothing, the more the Forsaken will see his inaction as a sign of weakness. The pattern moves and flows, only the dead are still. He must act or he will die. From a crossbow bolt in his back, or poison in his food, or the Forsaken banding together to rip his soul from his body. He must act or die. Elaine winced at each danger on her list. That they were real only made it worse. And you know what he must do, don't you? Nynaeve said tightly. You have this action planned. Moiraine nodded. Would you rather he go herring off alone once more? I dare not risk it. This time he might be dead or worse before I find him. That was true enough. Rand hardly knew what he was doing, and Elaine was sure Moiraine had no wish to lose the little guidance she still gave him, the little he allowed her to give. So, Moiraine wants him to start a war with Ilian. She thinks that's a smart way to start getting the nations working together. And Nynaeve's like, what the fuck? I've seen war. It's horrible. Why would your war be any better? And Elaine points out that by the very nature of Rand's dragoniness, war is inevitable. There's no way that there's not going to be some manner of war. And Moiraine says, nothing makes this war better or cleaner, except that it will cement the Terrans to him, and the Illianers will end up following him just as the Terrans do now. How could they not once the dragon banner flies over Ilion? Just the news of his victory might decide the wars in Tarabon and Aradomin in his favor. There are wars ended for you. In one stroke he will make himself so strong in terms of men and swords that only a coalition of every remaining nation from here to the Blight can defeat him, and with the same blow he shows the Forsaken that he is not a plump partridge on a limb for the netting. That will make them wary and buy him time to learn to use his strength. He must move first, be the hammer, not the nail. The Aes Sedai grimaced slightly, a hint of her earlier anger marring her calm. He must move first. And what does he do? He reads himself into deeper trouble. Nynaeve looked shaken, as if she could see all the battles and deaths. Egwene's dark eyes were large with horrified understanding. Their faces made Elaine shiver. One had watched Rand grow up, the other had grown up with him, and now they saw him starting wars. Not the dragon reborn, but Rand al'Thor. Egwene struggled visibly, latching onto the smallest part, the most inconsequential of what Moraine had said. How can reading put him in trouble? He has decided to find out for himself what the prophecies of the dragons say. Moraine's face remained cool and smooth, but suddenly she sounded almost as tired as Elaine felt. They may have been prescribed in Tyr, but the chief librarian had 9 different translations in a locked chest. Rand has them all now. I pointed out the verse that applies here, and he quoted it to me from an old Kandori translation. Power of the shadow made human flesh, wakened to turmoil, strife, and ruin. The reborn one, marked and bleeding, dances the sword in dreams and mist, chains the shadow-sworn to his will, from the city lost and forsaken, leads the spears to war once more, breaks the spears and makes them see truth long hidden in the ancient dream. She grimaced. It applies to this as well as it does to anything. Ilion under Samael is surely a forsaken city. Lead the Terran spears to war, chain Samael, and he has fulfilled the verse, the ancient dream of the dragon reborn, but he will not see it. He even has a copy in the old tongue, as if he understood 2 words. He runs after shadows, and Samael or Raven or Lanfear may have him by the throat before I can convince him of his mistake. He is desperate. Nynaeve's gentle tone was not for Moraine, Elaine was sure, but for Rand, desperate in trying to find his way. So am I desperate, Moraine said firmly. I have dedicated my life to finding him, and I will not let him fail if I can prevent it. How fucking dare he read? Put yourself in Rand's shoes if you can do it without having a panic attack. How would you go about being the dragon? You're in a place with resources. Not just money, but knowledge and people with expertise. The Stone of Tyr has a great library, and it has educated librarians that he can ask for help. Rand isn't stupid. He has Kalendor. He accepts that he's the dragon. Of course he's going to look for clues for his next move. And one of his first questions had to be, where do the Aiel fit into this? Why did they come here for me? I've heard over and over again that I look like an Aiel. Okay. I must have been born on the slopes of Dragon Mount to an Aiel woman. That's obvious at this point. So he's reading, he's scouring prophecies for signs, and he puts it all together and determines that Rhuidean is his next step. But in the time between, while he's still trying to figure everything out, he's trying to unsnarl that nebulous problem, and he's thinking, all I know is that I have to take them all by surprise. There's an attack on the Stone of Tyr, and he feels incredibly guilty about it. He has that whole sense of, I should have done more. I didn't use my power the right way. First he's using his little fire sword, and Lanfear has shown up, and she's like, what the fuck are you doing? You left Kalendor up in your room where anybody can get it, and you're using that dinky little sword, you fucking moron? And then he goes back for Kalendor and makes this crazy storm that just goes around and lightning zaps all of the shadow spawn. And once again, using Kalendor makes him really manic. He finds this dead girl, and he's just like, I wasn't fast enough, I wasn't good enough, but wait, I can do anything with this. And he tries to reanimate her, which is just really, really heartbreaking. It's such a sad scene. And Moraine catches up to him, and she's like, Rand, you can't do this, you can't fix this, death can't be healed. And so it says, the others. It was hard to speak. His throat hurt. Elaine, Perrin, the rest. Was I too late for them, too? You were not too late, Moraine said calmly, but she had come no closer, and Lon looked ready to dart between her and Rand. You must not— Are they still alive? Rand shouted. They are, she assured him. He nodded in weary relief. He tried not to look at the girl's body. 3 days waiting so he could enjoy a few stolen kisses. If he had moved 3 days ago. But he had learned things in those 3 days. things he might be able to use if he could put them together. If. Not too late for his friends, at least. Not too late for them. So, those days weren't wasted. He found the things that he needed. If he hadn't had those 3 days, he wouldn't have had all the pieces that he needed to make the right choice. But he punishes himself about it because he got some pleasure out of them, because he spent meaningful time with Elaine, because he had a little bit of fun, where Tom gave him intel about meetings and he got to sneak up on the High Lords and have a feeling of success and one-upmanship. He enjoyed himself, and so he punishes himself, even though he actually did need that time. And then Rand tells Moiraine that Lanfear was here, and it's like, she didn't try to kill me, and I didn't try to kill her. And she's like, I don't think you could kill her yet. And it says, tomorrow. He started away from them. Tomorrow, Moiraine said. Tomorrow I will tell you what I am going to do. Some of it he would. The thought of Moraine's face if he told her everything made him want to laugh. If he knew everything himself yet. Lanfear had given him almost the last piece without knowing it. One more step tonight. Lanfear gives him the last piece as she's talking to him just before he goes out and sees that the stone is under attack. He recognizes her as Selene when she first slips in after Mylon and Sunaman leave, but she comes out as Lanfear, and once he believes her, he asks her if she means to kill him. And she says, "Kill you," she spat incredulously. "Kill you. I mean to have you forever. You were mine long before that pale-haired milksop stole you, before she ever saw you. You loved me, and you loved power." For a moment he felt dazed. The words sounded true. He knew they were true, but where had they come from? Selene, Lanfear, seemed as startled as he, but she recovered quickly. "You've learned much. You've done much I'd not have believed you could unaided, but you are still fumbling your way through a maze in the dark, and your ignorance may kill you. Some of the others fear you too much to wait. Samael, Raven, Moghedien, others perhaps, but those of a certainty. They will come after you. They will not try to turn your heart. They will come at you by stealth, destroy you while you sleep, because of their fear. But there are those who could teach you, show you what you once knew. None would dare oppose you then." "Teach me? You want to let one of the Forsaken teach me?" One of the Forsaken. A male Forsaken. A man who had been Aes Sedai in the Age of Legends, who knew the ways of channeling, knew how to avoid the pitfalls, knew as much had been offered him before. So, in choosing to go to the Waste, the Aiel Waste is kind of like a trap. There are not a lot of ways to disguise oneself, so if you're gonna follow after him, it's gonna be pretty obvious. Rand makes his announcement to leave Tyr in dramatic fashion, and RJ does a POV time sync with the whole city shaking. Perrin feels it in the stables as he's leaving and has to gallop to escape the pull of Rand's Taviran, and Elaine and Nynaeve are already aboard the Seafolk Raker sitting in the sail mistress's cabin when Rand causes the baby tsunami. RJ presents both of these to us before we get to see what actually causes the earthquake. So Rand announces to the assembled nobles that the armies of Tyr are going to march, and they're all excited because they think they're going to march to Ilion. It says, Rand raised his left hand. Use it while you got it, Rand. Slowly, quiet fell, those in front anxiously shushing those behind. He waited for absolute silence. The armies will move north into Rhuidean. The High Lord Mylon will command, and under him the High Lords Gwayam, Ericombe, Hairn, Maracon, and Saman. The armies will be generously financed by the High Lord Torian, the wealthiest of you, who will accompany the armies to see that his money is spent wisely. Dead silence greeted this pronouncement. No one moved, though plain-faced Torian seemed to be having trouble standing. Moiraine had to give Rand a mental bow for his choices. Sending those 7 out of Tyr neatly eviscerated the 7 most dangerous plots against him, and none of those men trusted each other enough to scheme among themselves. Tom Merrilin had given him good advice. Obviously her spies had missed some of the notes he had slipped into Rand's pockets. But the rest? It was madness. He could not have had this for an answer on the other side of that ter'angreal. It was not possible, surely. Mylon obviously agreed with her, if not for the same reasons. He stepped forward hesitantly, a lean, hard man, but so frightened that the whites of his eyes showed all the way around. "My Lord Dragon." He stopped, swallowed, and began again in a marginally stronger voice. "My Lord Dragon, intervening in a civil war is stepping into a bog. A dozen factions contend for the Sun Throne with as many shifting alliances, each one betrayed every day. Besides that, bandits infest Rhuidean as fleas on a wild boar. Starving peasants have stripped the land bare. I am reliably informed that they eat bark and leaves. My Lord Dragon, a quagmire barely begins to describe—" Rand cut him off. "You do not want to extend Tyr's sway all the way to Kinslayer's dagger, Mylon? That is all right. I know who I mean to sit on the Sun Throne. You do not go to conquer, Mylon, but to restore order and peace, and to feed the hungry. There is more grain in the granaries now than Tyr could sell, and the farmers will harvest as much more this year unless you disobey me. Wagons will carry it north behind the armies, and those peasants will not have to eat bark any longer, my Lord Mylon." The tall High Lord opened his mouth again, and Rand swung Kalendor down, grounding its crystal point in front of him. "You have a question, Mylon?" Shaking his head, Mylon backed into the crowd as though trying to hide. "I knew he would not start a war," Egwene said fiercely. "I knew it." "You think there will be less killing in this?" Moraine muttered. What was the boy up to? At least he was not running off to save his village while the Forsaken had their way with the rest of the world. "The corpses will be piled as high, girl. You will not know the difference between this and a war." Attacking Ilian and Samael would have gained him time, even if it grew into a stalemate. Time to learn his power, and perhaps to bring down one of his strongest enemies, to cow the rest. What did he gain by this? Peace for the land of her birth, starving Rhuidean and fed? She would have applauded another time. It was laudably humane, and utterly senseless now. Useless bloodshed rather than confronting an enemy who would destroy him given the slightest opening. Why? Lanfear. What had Lanfear said to him? What had she done? The possibilities chilled Moraine's heart. Rand would take closer watching than ever now. She would not allow him to turn to the shadow. So, a dark dragon has always been a fear of Moraine's, and fair enough. Not because Rand is susceptible to the pull of the dark side, but just because the concept is terrifying. And from the start, she was always like, before the Dark One can have you guys, I'll kill you myself. So, she cannot understand that he is doing what people least expect. Nobody's going to expect him to interfere in a civil war because Mylon is right, it's a quagmire. But he feels a certain sense of responsibility to Rhuidean, and that's at least partly on her, because she told him at the end of the Great Hunt, what happened to Rhuidean was your fault. Not that you did it, but you were the catalyst. You were the catalyst and everything fell apart, and so he's just kind of like, well, let me do what I can to unfuck it. And then Rand, who is a remarkably disciplined person, I'm always impressed with how much self-control he has. He's just really good at, for the most part, having self-discipline. So Rand thrusts the sword back into the stone, and it says, for a moment Moraine thought he was going to take hold of it again, but instead he forced himself to his feet. He did have to force himself, she was certain. Look at this while I am gone. His voice was lighter, more the way it had been when she first found him in his village, but no less sure or firm than it had been moments before. Look at it and remember me. Remember I will come back for it. If anyone wants to take my place, all they have to do is pull it out. He waggled a finger at them, grinning almost mischievously. But remember the price of failure. Turning on his heel, he marched out of the chamber, the Aiel following in behind him. Staring at the sword rising out of the floor of the heart, the Tarrans got to their feet more slowly. Most looked ready to run, but too frightened too. Rand doesn't trust himself, and he pored through all the prophecies trying to figure out the right thing to do, so when he reads the prophecy, into the heart he thrust the sword to hold their hearts, he had to have felt relieved. He's kind of like, that seems like a smart thing to do. It seems like the right thing to do. It makes sense. They'll know that I'm coming back for it if I put it there, because who the fuck wouldn't come back for it? But it feels good to leave it here. And then Moraine's like, yo, anybody can channel it back out, dumbass. And he's like, I put a nasty trap on it, so I wouldn't recommend it. So he has figured out all of the things that he needs to do. And it was a brain exercise. It wasn't Ta'Veren. He worked really hard. He made use of resources. He read fuck tons of books, and he asked people for help. He asked the librarians, can I have all the books on the Aiel? Could I have all the prophecies of the dragon? I need this, and this, and this. When he decides how he's going to get to Rhuidean and he wants a portal stone, he's able to find one. As they're traveling after they've left the stone, heading to the portal stone, Rand says, "When I described one to the chief librarian in the stone, without naming what he was after," he did not add, "he recognized it, even if he didn't know what it was, enough to show me 4 on an old map of Tyr." 4? Moraine sounded startled. "All in Tyr? Portal stones are not so common as that." 4, Rand said definitely. The bony old librarian had been certain, even digging out a tattered yellow manuscript telling of efforts to move the unknown artifacts of an earlier age to the Great Holding. And that's another thing that I would love to see is Rand's interaction with the librarian as he's learning to be a good governor and learning how to do this right. Because an eager student who asks intelligent questions and wants help is always a delight. And seeing someone whose common birth probably means their education is irrelevant to the High Lords having positive interactions with Rand, because I imagine that he did have really positive interactions with the librarian, would be a really cool experience. I would love even more sketches or vignettes of common people helping this common person who is working to make their lives better succeed. And I just feel like all of these interactions in the stone that Rand had with more common people, while he still has so much warmth and humanity and boyishness and naivete, allowed him to build off-screen a reputation for himself in a way that he just can't later on when he's so much harder and colder and exhausted. Because Rand's 25 days in Tyr is a Rand that we never see again. He is so much more content in some ways, and he's filled with duty and purpose, but he is angry too. He's suspicious. He's not manic crazy at this point in time, but he's getting paranoid. But there's so much more to him. RJ shows us that he has intelligence and cleverness and determination. He has a willingness to make use of resources and ask for help, whether from a librarian or his girlfriend, and he has an understanding, too, that he owes the Aiel and that he needs them, and so he navigates through all of the uncertainty of, what do I do next? What does being the dragon mean? What do I have to do to get this right? And he makes a choice, and in so doing, the whole flavor of the story changes. I hope you've enjoyed this episode of Podcast of the Dragon. I'll get this launched, hopefully, in this really small window before everyone completely loses their shit because the show is dropped. This episode's accompanying minisode on Patreon is an exploration of the writing style that RJ employs at the beginning of Chapter 9 as he does his subtle POV switches and kind of muddies up his narrators with some omniscient writing. I had a great time breaking that down, and if you'd like to support the show and listen to me nerd out hardcore on that and have access to other fun content as well, there's a link in the show notes. There are links to my Discord, to my email, to the Watt Trivia and Games Discord, and the Watt Fandom and Calendar Discord. There's a link to my YouTube you should go and subscribe, as well as to my Twitter handle @PodOfTheDragon. There's also a link to Apple Podcasts. If you could review my show, I'd really appreciate it. It will help other people find me. So will word of mouth. So if you know anyone who likes The Wheel of Time and might be interested in a different kind of podcast, please tell them about me. My music is by Kevin MacLeod. My name is Morgan. And if I could channel, I don't know if I'd do arts and crafts. It sounds far more attractive to be able to clean my house without having to get up off my sofa. Like seriously, I'd wash the walls and do some hardcore detailing, and do you think the one power would leave streaks on glass?